Okay, so we're going to get started today, and for the next 3 exercises. So today, obviously, Wednesday, yes, we do have class before Thanksgiving, and then when you guys get back on Monday, we're going to be going through creating a variety of drawings from your Rhino file. And to me, this is actually a really important thing to get comfortable with. When obviously you've spent the whole semester doing renderings, and the renderings are great, but when you get to trying to do a presentation, you've spent a lot of time building this great Rhino model. Well, somebody's going to ask you for plans, sections, elevations, the standard views, in addition to your really awesome perspective view. And so we're going to spend time going through how do we create those various views. Today's the easiest one because we're going to do an elevation first. I know that Anthony chopped that out of your 220 stuff because he was tired of looking at ugly elevations. The reason that elevations are ugly is that they don't have enough detail in them. That's always the case. If you have enough detail in them, they're not ugly. So the more detail you have, the better your elevations are going to be. My guess is in this, because it's pretty small, you have a fair amount of detail in it. So chances are the elevation is going to look okay. I'm going to still teach you how to do elevations, even though you don't technically have to do them for 220 this round, because at some point you'll end up having to do them later on. One other side note that I want to point out, obviously Wednesday is the day before Thanksgiving. We're having class as normal, but I moved my office hours so that I don't have to stay here later to before class. Not that it's a big deal. Most of you would just keep talking to me anyway, and I'd stay here anyway, whatever. Officially, they've moved, but it is what it is. So I wanted to tell you guys that before we go forward. Okay, so in terms of creating line drawings, I'm going to show you a couple new things today, one of which is a command called the Make 2D. And it's probably, well, it might even be better than the project command in terms of how awesome it is. So it's something you definitely want to have in your tool bag, and we will cover it over and over and over again for the next 3 lectures. So it's not unique. The elevation view is probably the easiest because we're not cutting a section. We're not cutting through the building. We're not worrying about see-through materials or anything else. We will get back to doing that when we do the plan and obviously the section in terms of line drawings. We also, as part of this, will spend a little bit of time in Illustrator. And I think I've had almost all of you in 135. Therefore, I know you have decent skills in Illustrator. For those of you that haven't taken 135 and/or, well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you could technically take this class without taking 135. If you haven't ever opened Illustrator before, that's okay. I will give you a very scripted set of steps that you're going to go through as part of what we're doing today. Everything that I'll do today is very written out. It's under Assembly 10.8. And so you can pull this up, and it's really step by step. I've tried to include lots and lots of images so that you can see. I know there's a lot of steps as I keep scrolling down, but that you can see kind of the process. So hopefully it'll be relatively easy, but if you need to go back and double check what I'm doing, it's there, and obviously I'll post the lecture as well. So first thing, I've gone ahead and I've opened up my site file. This is my master site file, but before I start to get into elevation views, just in case I mess with things and/or because I'm going to be applying some different materials, I'm going to do a save as. So I'll do File and then Save As. And I'm going to call this Master Site, and it's going to be Elevation. And I'll go ahead and click Save. The reason that I waste the time of actually doing this with you live is to remind you how important it is to do it. So I've gone ahead and I've done a Save As. This is now my elevation file. And so now I need to actually set up the elevation view. What's the view going to be? I have a couple different elevations that I could do. I could do this elevation here, or I could do this elevation here. And I've done both in the past. I'm going to do this one because it's got a little bit more interest to it. But I could do it of any and all sides as we go forward. So at this point, I need to start to set up this as an actual elevation view. And my building is on a north-south axis, so it's really easy. I can use the preset views to set myself up for this. So if I went to Set View and I went to, I forget whether it's the front or the back, I should be able to figure out where my building is. So here's a problem. My ocean's in the way. So I can turn off the ocean for now so I can see, And yes, there we go. And for the elevation view, the ocean's so much lower, it doesn't make any difference that I've turned that off. So I'm going to get myself in here at a relatively nice view. When we do this, we are actually going to do it to scale. So I'll show you how the scale works. But in the meantime, I'm just going to center my drawing. Sometimes it's useful to take your block, zoom selected, so that you get the whole block in there. This one is a little bit, I don't need all of that stuff below. So we'll do that. It also looks like I turned off, let me type show. There we go. I turned off some objects. The bunch grass can all go away. We can turn that off. But I did want to make sure I included those surfaces for this elevation view. No, it looks like I need just a little bit more to get that bottom corner. There we go. So at this point, I am going to save this view. So I'll go back to my set view, named views, and I will call this my elevation. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And I've now established my basic elevation view of this drawing. So that's good, and I'll come back to it as we go forward. The one other thing that I think might be helpful is I might want to show the contours of the ground around this particular building. So I'm actually going to do a contour command of the ground just as kind of a background. Let me go ahead and create a new layer. Let's see here. I'll put it under construction here. Go new layer. This is topo lines. And again, this is just for the export. Let's make that current. We'll come back to that view in just a second. Set view and then perspective. There we go. All right. So I'm going to contour. And I'm going to contour this plus that plus this. So I'm getting all of the land around my building. I'll press enter when done. Contour base point, we'll pick out here. Direction perpendicular, this is going to go in the z-axis. So let me make sure I get up in the z-axis here. There we go. And my distance between the contours, 1 foot is probably a little tight. Let's try 5 feet. And I know that's pretty dense as we go up here. But I'm looking at just this elevation view. So there, that gives me my contours in this section. Could probably do a little bit tighter than that. Let me try it one more time. Base point, z-axis. I'll do it at 2 feet. Perfect. It just makes it a little bit denser, and I'll use those as backdrop for my final export here. There we go. So I'm still back in this elevation view, and at this point, I want to see what the camera looks like in this view. So I'll go to set view, set camera, and then show camera. And we'll be able to see in one of these other views this camera. And let me see if I can get it as shaded so you can see it a little bit better. It's a really long, there's the camera right there. Not that. It's really long because it's in parallel projection. And that's something we want to make sure is set correctly. So if yours is in perspective, you want to make sure that you go back to your properties with nothing selected and select your projection as parallel. The alternative, just so you can see the difference, would be looking at it like this, where things are receding, okay, to a single point there. We want to make sure that it's in parallel so that nothing is receding. I'm going to go back to my current view here, like that. And at this point, I now want to actually create a line drawing from this view. And this is where that command called make2D comes into play. So what make2D does is it says, whatever the view is that I'm looking at, I want a 2D line drawing of that view. It's really cool when we do it in perspective because you can actually create a 2D line drawing of a perspective. But I'm going to do it of this elevation view. So I'm going to go ahead and create a layer over here before I get started called Make 2D. And I believe the Make 2D will probably create a layer itself, but just in case, I want to do it as once. And then I'll go ahead and type Make 2D. Select Objects to Draw. I want to make sure that I'm selecting everything that I can see in this scene. So I'll make sure that everything is selected here. Notice it won't select the lights because obviously that's not part of the drawing. Those are part of the rendering files. So I have it all selected. I'll press Enter when I'm done. And then I get options here. So as I do, what do I want to make the 2D of? The current view. That's what I want. Options. Show hidden lines. Yeah, go ahead and show hidden lines. The other option that I have is to maintain source layers or not. The more advanced you are at doing this, you may decide you want to maintain source layers. This will help you in your Illustrator file because you can go through and see all of your individual layers. If you don't check this box, you'll get two layers. One will be visible and one will be hidden. It's really easy to select the hidden lines and the visible lines in Illustrator because you just have two layers. But in all reality, you probably want more selection options. So if something's inside, you might want it to be a little bit thinner. If something's outside, you might want it to be a little thicker, that sort of thing. I'm going to go ahead and say Maintain Source Layers and show you. Actually, I'll do one each so you can see them both. So I'll check Maintain Source Layers. And then it asks for layers for the Make 2D objects. So it gives us visible and hidden. Those are fine. I'll go ahead and say OK. Now this is going to take a little while. So give it a second. All right, so it did that. And if I were to look at it in the top view, so let me go to Set View, Top. There is a flat line drawing of this elevation view. You can see it over here in perspective. So there's that flat drawing that includes the whole elevation. Now, unfortunately, I forgot one step, and this is my mistake, so I'm going to end up doing this over again. But before I do that, Make 2D, I need to know the exact outer bounds of this elevation view. And that'll help me down the road when I try to line stuff up. So with the camera still showing, which it is, I'm going to go into the perspective view, and I'm going to create a box on my camera right here. Let me switch into wireframe so I can see. See these 3 points that are my camera? I'm going to use those right now to create a rectangle. So let me go into rectangle. I'm going to do 3 points. And I'll go from, turn off not, make sure point is selected. I'll go from point to right there. That gives me a quarter of the size of my view. And I can then do a scale, just a regular scale, from this point, type 2, because it's twice the size, and that gives me the full size of the rectangle. Now when I go back to my elevation view, you could just barely see a little bit of yellow around the outside of my view, which represents that rectangle. So let me go back and do a Make 2D again. Make 2D. I'm going to maintain the source layer, so it inherited all of my property. I'll go ahead and say, oops, hold on a second. I have to select everything. Make 2D, select objects to draw. I'm just going to go ahead and type all because I want to include that rectangular line that goes around my viewport. I'll press Enter when I'm done. These options are fine. I'm going to maintain the source layer, and I'll go ahead and say OK. give it a little bit more time here. There we go. Okay, so it created its drawing. Let me go look in the perspective view here. And this time, I have that box around my view, which matches up with my view. So let me move this away from my model for just a second. Like that. And then I can use this box. Let me go ahead and zoom selected there. I can select these pieces of my box, like that. And I can trim and get rid of the stuff that's outside of my box. Oops. Hopefully. One last little piece here. There we go. And once I've trimmed that out, I can select my view. There it is. I'll type move. I'll move this outside. And then I can actually get rid of all this extra land and what have you, because I don't need it. There we go. So this now is a flat view of my actual building that I can then bring into something like Illustrator. So let me go ahead and take this, and I'm going to move this so that this lower corner here is at 0, 0, 0. It's important that you move it to the origin before we do the export. So let me zoom selected. There it is at the origin. And I'm going to go to File and then Export Selected. Notice it's selected. And I'm going to save this into today's folder. Okay, good. I'm in the right folder. Okay, so when I do this, though, I'm going to change to Adobe Illustrator as my export format. So previously we've done, 3D Studio, or excuse me, AutoCAD. This time we're going to do Adobe Illustrator. I'll give it a name. This will be the elevation 01. And I'll go ahead and save. And when I do hit the save button, I get the AI export options. So at this point, oh, hold on a second. Let me cancel for a second. I think I have to do this in the top view. So I'm going to go back to the top view and then zoom, selected. There we go. And then File, Export, Selected. And here we go. There's my options. I was in the perspective view, so it wasn't giving me the options. I need the options. So make sure you're in the top view. This is elevation 01. I'm going to click on Options. And here, under Scale, we can actually set a scale for this particular drawing. So you have to have some awareness of how big the building is. I'm doing it at quarter scale. Quarter inch equals a foot, which means that I'm going to do 48 inches is equal to 1 inch in scale. I know it's a little bit weird to calculate it out that way, but that's quarter inch equals a foot. And I'll go ahead and say OK at that point. We'll go ahead and click on Save. It pops this up one more time. We'll go ahead and say yes. And it's going to export those lines. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up Illustrator and take a look at what I created. Nope. All right, let me go into File and then Open. And let me open up the file that I just created. There it is. I'll go ahead and say Open. If you didn't move it right to the origin, you're going to end up with an error that says the drawing is off the artboard or something like that. Let me zoom out a little bit. As it is, my artboard is a little bit off-center and not set up correctly. Let me go ahead and click on the Artboard tool, which is right here. Looks kind of like a crop tool. And I'm going to adjust the corners to match up with the corners of my view. So now my artboard is set. I'll click on the black arrow, and we can now see my drawing. So this is actually a live line drawing. I can select any one of these lines in here, which is great. If I look at my layers right now, they're a total mess. Okay? So this is, I told you, you can do it where you get two layers, visible and hidden, or you can get it where you get all of the layers, which can be great or can be kind of a pain. So at this point, I need to do some organization. So I'm going to try to group these together by which ones are hidden and which ones are visible, so that at least I have some broad categories. So let me create a brand new layer. I'm going to call this layer Visible. There we go. And I'm going to take anything that says Visible. So make 2D Visible. And I'm going to hold down Control and select all of them that say Visible. And there's a couple more here. And once I have all of those selected, I'll click and drag them onto the visible layer, which will make one master visible layer, and all the layers will be underneath it. I'll create one more layer. I'll call this one Hidden. And I'll take all of the, whoops, I did miss that one. I'll take all of the hidden layers and put them onto the hidden. There the rest of them are. Drop those onto the hidden layer. Perfect. So one of the unfortunate things that Illustrator does when it does this export is it makes the hidden lines, all the colors of the layers, a lot of them are white. See how all the layer colors are white? If I were to change that color, for example, to not white, it makes it much easier to see where the lines are. Let me see if I can do it for all of them. No, it's not going to let me do it for all of them. This will make more sense later on. But when I do the selections, let me go ahead and select these, for example. It's hard to see them because they're not colored. Here. There we go. I don't know how to better explain this. See that white stripe that goes across there? That is my object. It just happens to be white, so I can't really see it. So it's kind of hard. So let me go ahead and select all the hidden lines to start. So I'm going to click over here next to where it says hidden. I'll click on the right next to the little circle there. There's a square. If I click on that, it selects all the objects on that particular layer. And I'm going to start by assigning them not white, but black. So let me double click on the stroke. And actually, let me assign them kind of a light gray. Say OK. Now we can start to see that, lo and behold, there are a lot of lines there. They were just white, so I couldn't see them. So I'm also going to go in and change the line stroke a bit. When I click on stroke, if you don't see this menu, you might just see the weight. If you don't see it, go ahead and click on Show Options. I'm going to convert these to be a dashed line. And the dashed line I'm going to do is a 1 point, or maybe a 2 point by 1 point, so that they're kind of a faint little dashed line. If I click off so nothing's selected, you'll be able to see them a little bit better now. They're still a little too heavy. So let me go back and select all of them again. And then I'll go back to the stroke, and I'll say maybe a weight of 0.25 points. So they're much lighter now, but you can see that there's a lot of stuff going on that's hidden. And this adds an element of depth to your overall drawing, which is nice. If I press Control 0 so we can zoom out, we can get, well, you guys can't see it quite as well as I can on my screen. You can see that there are, in fact, a bunch of lines that are there. Now, when we get back to the visible lines, we might want to spend a little bit more time thinking through what these lines are. So, for example, if I come down here, these would be my visible topo lines, if I were to select those. Those probably need to be a little bit lighter. So I'll go up to my stroke here, and instead of being 1 point, maybe I'll do 0.5. So they're a little bit thinner and a little bit lighter. Makes them recede a bit into the background. Now maybe I'll come in and I'll select things where my walls. Here's my exterior walls. Let me select those, and let me see. Well, it looks like they're purple right now. We got to change those to be in black. And I might change and make that a little bit thicker, 1.25, for example. So they end up being a little bit thicker. Then I'll come in here and I'll say, let me look at my windows. Let me take all my windows here. And I'll change those and make all of those at 0.75. So the reason that I kept those layers separate is now I can use them to select and change line weights. It's a little bit harder to do because you've got to keep track of so many more lines. So at some point, you'll be happy with what the line weights look like. And I'm not there yet. It's going to take me a little bit more time. You may even find that you go in and you select some of the lines manually. So I might select that line, for example, and I might say, you know what, that needs to be a little bit thicker. Let me bump it up to 2 points so it's a little bit thicker on the outside of my building. Maybe I'm going to take this top and we'll bump that one up a bit too. And you're going to kind of look at what's going to make this building start to stand out. It still only really exists as a line drawing right now. So I might go in and might make a few other adjustments, like this piece of surface right here doesn't need to be there. I don't need lines for that because that was something that was part of my drawing. So I might come in and I might delete this particular piece. You may also find that, oh, it's all the construction lines. Let me just go ahead and take those and get rid of those because I don't want those. So sometimes you can do it that way, or you can jump up a little bit. Sometimes you might want part of it. I do actually like this line, but I don't like these lines. So you have to kind of play with which ones need to go away and which ones don't. That faint line can go away. And so you spend a little bit of time actually really cleaning up those extra lines. Likewise, some of these hidden lines can go away. I don't need these hidden lines, the contours. So that might be a good time to select all of the topo lines that are hidden and delete all of those. So you see I'm working my way through. I may or may not want some of these other diagonal lines. Those might need to be cleaned up a bit. So you want to take the time. This line here is the line against the back of the house. I don't need that. So it's going to take a while to get it perfect. And at some point, you're going to start looking at it and say, yeah, you know, it looks reasonable. Okay, I have a nice looking line drawing here. It's a good elevation. I'm happy. And I'd say, well, wait a minute. Maybe we could take this a little bit further than it currently is. So let me go ahead and save this for right now. And I'm going to go back to my Rhino file. Chances are it's going to say converted after you open. It's just because it's been converted after Rhino created the file in the first place. But I'm just going to save over this. Yes, I want to replace it. All right, perfect. I'm going to go back to Rhino, and I'm going to go back to the view where I had my elevation. So there it is. So I could do a full color rendering of this and drop it behind my line drawings. So that's one strategy. I'm not going to do it right now because it'll take a little bit of time to do that, but that's something I could do. But instead, maybe I just want it to be kind of a grayed out, but I want some of the shadows left. So I'm going to go through and do a little bit different strategy for this rendering. And again, if you get a little lost, the steps are listed down here. This is essentially what we're creating. Well, you guys can barely see it. It's the shadows that are on the building. That's what we're trying to create. So we're going to go ahead and do a clay rendering. And there's a little walkthrough for how we're going to do a clay rendering, which, of course, the link doesn't work. Gotta love it. It's probably under VRay. Let's see here. I think it's 2.9. There it is, 8.29 for clay rendering. OK, so as part of this, I have a VisOpt file that you can load. Remember, I told you were going to mess with your settings. So you can actually just download this instead of having to create it. So let me go ahead and download. I'll save link as, and I'll save it into today's folder. So that I can get it. And I'm going to go ahead and load up that file. So I'll go into my VRay Options. I'll open a drawer, and then I'll go load the clay render. And let's see if I can find it again. There we go. Clay render. Drawer will close when it loads. Now, one of the key things that's happened here is it's going to override the materials in this with a gray color. And I don't know, it should have done that by default. I'm going to click on this override materials with the check mark, and the override color is going to be this kind of light gray color. So what that does is it says temporarily cover up all my materials with just a plain gray. And so at this point, we could go ahead and render and say, what does it look like? Well, it's significantly too bright because I still have my sun on. Now, I have two different options when it comes to adjusting for the sun. I can either go into my VRay Options, and I can go into my camera, and I could turn, well, that's weird. Let me turn the physical camera on. Should have been on. Clearly that setup isn't right. And with the physical camera on, I can then get this rendering. So I'm getting a shadow on the ground here. I'm getting a shadow cast on my building. There's a little bit of depth here. It's a little bit too dark. If I think of this with a line drawing, don't worry about the background. We'll get rid of that in just a second. But it's a little bit too dark. So let me go back to my VRay Options. And I'm going to change that physical camera. We'll say maybe, let's do 100, and we'll give that one a shot. I also want to go into my output here, and I want to make sure that I get the exact viewport. So let me get the view aspect of my view, and we're going to, once I get this right, I'm going to bump this way up in terms of the resolution. And you can see that when we start to do these renderings, the clay renderings are really fast. So it's easy to do a quick test and say, is it looking the way I want? So 100's, yeah, that's pretty reasonable. Might be a little bit different. Let me go to VRay Options. It might be 125. There's no reason not to take your time and really dial this in so that you get it looking good. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go into my VRay Options. And at this point, I'm going to bump way up the output. So we're thinking maybe 5,000 here. Remember, this is going to be dependent on the size it is long term. 300 pixels per inch divided by however long it's going to be. I'm guessing 5,000 might get us somewhere. Oops, hold on a second. Let me get my view aspect. I have to lock it. Now it's at 5,000. And I'll go ahead and I'll render it. And again, it's a clay rendering, so it's quick, which is nice. Almost done. So it looks like I have a little stripe here that's a gap in my ground where they didn't quite match up correctly. That's a simple Photoshop clone stamp fix. Perfect. So it's done. I'm going to save all the channels. So we'll save that into today's folder as well. So this is elevation, 01, clay. And I'll click save. It saves all the channels. And we could go straight into Illustrator with this file. Control minus here. I could go to File and then Place. And I can drop this clay right into this file. Now, the size of the window is going to be the same. I'm just going to have to drop this down so that it matches up with my viewport, or excuse me, my artboard. Like that. Control 0, I can slide this up. Like that. There we go. And if I did it correctly, it should line up perfectly with my building. So right like that. So now that I have that set up and or rendered, we can press Control 0, and now I have a little bit of background as part of it. To me, it's still a little bit strong. Certainly the gray sky is a little bit too much. So I might go in and make some retouches in Photoshop before I brought it back in. So let me go and open up Photoshop. And again, this is the kind of thing where it starts to not be required. If you've never touched Photoshop before, you don't have to do it. But this is where there's crossover. If you're comfortable in Photoshop, if you're comfortable in Illustrator, all of a sudden you can use them for their desired tools. Let me go ahead and go to File and then Open. And let me open up that file. There it is. Go ahead and open. I don't want the upper part of the sky anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'll use Magic Wand, and I can select that part of the sky, layer from background, and I can actually just go ahead and delete that part. That's easy. It's all one color. That gets rid of the sky for me. I could also come in and I could, with my paintbrush, I could use the white color here, and I could paint in, make my brush a little smaller here, and get rid of that extra little stripe there. I also might want this not to have that slight yellowish tint, so I could convert it into black and white. I could go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I could go to my channel mixer. I could convert it into monochrome, which just makes it gray instead of that. I could also go through and try some of my other filters just in case one worked better than the other. This is fine. At this point, I can do a File, Save. I want this to be a JPEG, and I'm going to permanently apply all the changes to it. And I'll replace it. And now if I went back to the Illustrator file, I could view links. So let me go to Window and then Links, and I could update this particular file. Well, I might. It should have. It should have replaced the file for me, but for some reason it decided not to. Let me relink the file, and I'll drop it in again. And now it has a white background, and it's in gray. So this by itself is helping the look of the file quite a bit. Control minus, for example. Now we can start to see this as a line drawing. Just a little bit of shadow makes a big difference, right? It makes the building pop out. We can see pieces of the building. So it's a little bit more than just a line drawing, but it's not too overpowering in terms of what I'm trying to do. We could take it a step further. We could put a grunge texture in for the ground or something along those lines if we wanted to. The easiest way of doing that, I think, would probably be to do it in the sky rather than doing it in the ground, because there's less pieces to cut out. So I'll go ahead and go to File and then Place. Actually, I'm going to place in this file here. Let me think here. What's the best way of doing it? Yeah, I'll go to File and then Place, and I'm going to drop in the alpha, which we also saved, which is just the black and white sky. I have to make this a little bit smaller, so we'll go into Transform and drop it down. Control 0, so we can zoom in here. Let's line this up. I didn't hold down Shift, so I got out of proportion here. Okay, there it is, back in proportion. Now, on this particular file, I'm going to go into my opacity right here, and I'm going to make a mask. And on the mask file, I'm going to place in my grunge texture. So I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll go find a grunge texture. If I lost you a little bit, no worries. It is written out in the steps if you want to do it. You don't have to. Just this with the shadows is more than enough. Let me go into my resources here, and I have grunge textures already saved. and I'll drop in one of these grunge textures as a background. Just gives me a little bit of background. Let me rotate over a little bit, make it a little bit bigger here, like that. It might be a little too ominous in this particular view, so I may decide that I want to invert the mask to make it a little bit lighter. That might help a little bit. It's still a little bit strong. Let me adjust the opacity down so that it's a little bit lighter. Oh, you guys can't even see that. It actually looks decent on mine though. So I'll leave it like that. And now the sky has just a little bit of dirt as part of it, which can help. Okay? So I've gone ahead and I've done that. Now if we press Control-0 to look at it, yeah, you can see a little bit of it there. But we have a nice looking line drawing. There's a few other pieces that need to get cleaned up here. So maybe this piece looks like my my alpha channel is off ever so slightly. I've got a little bit of a halo happening there. But that was an alignment issue. Let me go back and start working on the drawing itself. And let's see if I can't fix that. It's bugging me. There we go. Didn't want that little bit of extra. So now that that's set up, I could go in and I could spend a little bit more time cleaning up a few lines, like that line needs to go away, etc. Okay? So the idea here is that from our Rhino model, we were able to relatively easily create an elevation view that has a little bit of shadow behind it, but that is fundamentally a line drawing. It's not a rendering anymore. It's a line drawing. So we will be going back through these steps over and over again because we're going to do the plan and we're going to do the section. The difference between those is we have to cut the building. So it's essentially the same thing 3 times. We're just cutting the building and changing part of it to see-through. So it's a combination of last lecture, 227, and today's lecture, 228. Okay? So give the elevation a shot and see how it turns out. Remember, you are required as part of your final project to do, I think it's two views. The elevation, I don't know, I have to look. You're at least going to do 2, it might be 3, elevation, plan, and or section. So those are required as part of your final project. So what you're doing today, if your model's done, could actually be part of your final, if it turns out. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So I'll turn you loose. Let me know if you have any questions.